You're listening to Reverie, True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. It was 2 p.m. on Monday, March 23rd, 2015, when 30-year-old Aaron Quinn was calling 911 from his home on Mare Island in Vallejo, California. He sounded exhausted, terrified, and confused. He told the dispatcher that hours earlier, around 3 a.m., he had been woken up by a bright light shining in his eyes. A voice said, "Wake up! This is a robbery." Men with guns had broken into his home, drugged him and his girlfriend, Denise Huskins, tied them up, and then kidnapped Denise, demanding an $8,500 ransom. Aaron Quinn had been bound and drugged for almost 11 hours. When he finally freed himself, his girlfriend Denise was gone. Within hours, Vallejo police launched a massive search. Over 100 search and rescue team members combed the waterfront. Divers searched the waters around Mare Island. Dogs followed scent trails, and helicopters circled overhead. 2 days later, Denise Huskins was released 400 miles away in Huntington Beach, near her parents' home. She was alive and safe. Then Vallejo police did something extraordinary. They called a press conference and announced to the world that the kidnapping was a hoax. Lieutenant Kenny Park stood before cameras and said, quote, "Mr. Quinn and Miss Huskins have plundered valuable resources away from our community. It is Mr. Quinn and Miss Huskins that owe this community an apology." End quote. The media went wild. Headlines screamed, quote, "Gone Girl Hoax." Comparisons to the 2014 thriller film Gone Girl, in which a woman fakes her own kidnapping, dominated coverage. Aaron Quinn and Denise Huskins were vilified as liars, attention seekers, criminals who had wasted taxpayer money. Except for one problem. It wasn't a hoax at all. Denise Huskins had been kidnapped. She had been drugged, bound, sexually assaulted, and held captive for 48 hours by a Harvard-educated attorney and former Marine named Matthew Muller, a serial rapist who had been committing similar crimes for years. Vallejo police, instead of investigating, instead of believing the victims, instead of doing their jobs, had destroyed their reputations, accused them of crimes, and allowed a dangerous predator to remain free to victimize others. This is the story of Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn. A story about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you become your worst enemies. A story about resilience, vindication, and the long fight for justice. Let's get into it. Before we talk about the nightmare, we need to understand who Denise and Aaron were before March 23rd, 2015. Denise Huskins was 29 years old in early 2015. She had grown up in Huntington Beach in Southern California in a loving family. She was smart, driven, and compassionate. Denise was the kind of person who wanted to help others. After studying at Long Island University in Brooklyn, she earned her physical therapy license in Massachusetts. In 2013, she moved to California and got licensed there as well. By 2015, Denise was working as a physical therapist at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Vallejo. She loved her job. She was very good at it, and her patients appreciated her kindness and expertise. Denise was also navigating life as a single woman in her late 20s. She'd had relationships, heartbreaks, and the usual ups and downs, but she was happy, independent, and building a career and a life that she was proud of. Aaron Quinn was 30 years old and was also working as a physical therapist at Kaiser Permanente Vallejo. He'd recently gotten out of a relationship. It was an engagement that had ended painfully when he discovered that his fiancée had cheated on him. The betrayal had left him questioning everything, especially his ability to trust. Aaron was cautious, introspective, and still healing from that betrayal when he met Denise. They met at work in 2014, and the connection was immediate. Aaron later recalled, quote, "I was very conflicted because I obviously was attracted to Denise, but I also didn't trust myself anymore." End quote. Denise saw something in Aaron that drew her in despite his hesitation. She said, quote, "I could see who Aaron was and the man he was and the good in him. I knew that he'd be a great partner, but I could see that he was struggling." End quote. They began dating, slowly and carefully. Two people trying to figure out if they could trust each other, if this could work, and if they were ready for something real. But Aaron's past kept haunting him. In February of 2015, Denise discovered that Aaron had been messaging his ex-fiancée about possibly getting back together. This devastated her. Denise recalled, quote, "I finally just put my foot down and said, 'Look, I don't deserve this.'" End quote. They broke up, or at least they tried to, because neither of them could really let go. They still cared about each other. They still believed there was something worth fighting for. So, on Sunday, March 22nd, 2015, they decided to have one more conversation to figure out if they wanted to try again or if it was truly over. Denise drove to Aaron's home in Mare Island. It's a former naval base in Vallejo that had been converted to residential and commercial use. Aaron lived in a modest house at 500 Kirkland Avenue. Denise said, quote, "I brought pizza and we sat on the couch most of the night and talked. We talked about how it would be difficult. We had to rebuild trust, but as long as he was willing to really give this a full shot, then we could try again." End quote. They talked for hours about their fears, their hopes, and their feelings. It felt, Denise said, like a fresh start. Around midnight, they went to bed. Denise stayed over, and they fell asleep together, believing they were going to try to make it work. What they didn't know was that they were being watched. March 23rd, 2015, approximately 3 a.m., a voice says, "Wake up. This is a robbery." Aaron Quinn woke up to a blinding light shining directly in his face. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard the voice again. "Wake up. This is a robbery." There was a buzzing sound, like a stun gun crackling. Aaron's heart hammered in his chest. This was real. Someone was in his bedroom. The voice commanded Aaron and Denise to lie face down on the bed. Don't move, don't look, don't speak. Denise recalled, quote, I remember being asleep and hearing a voice thinking it was a dream, and the next thing I knew, I was being tied up. End quote. The intruder, who was dressed in all black, wearing what appeared to be a wetsuit, moved quickly and efficiently. He zip-tied Aaron's wrist behind his back. He zip-tied Denise's wrists. He placed blackout swim goggles over their eyes so they couldn't see, and he wrapped their heads with tape. Then he forced them to drink something, a liquid that tasted bitter and chemical. Aaron would later learn it was a sedative, likely a mixture of NyQuil or a similar over-the-counter sleep aid mixed with something stronger. As the drug began to take effect, Aaron and Denise heard something that made their blood run cold. A recorded voice began playing from a speaker. The recording was professional, calculated, and terrifying. It sounded like multiple people whispering to each other. The voices claimed to be part of a sophisticated criminal organization. They said that they had been watching the house. They knew Aaron and Denise's routines. They said that any attempt to resist, any attempt to call for help, would result in punishment, which was face cutting or electrical shock. The recording demanded $8,500 in ransom. It gave specific instructions on how the money should be delivered. Then the intruder, Matthew Muller, though Aaron and Denise didn't know his name yet, did something that would later become crucial evidence. He placed headphones over their ears and played white noise and music in order to make them disoriented, to prevent them from hearing what was happening. Aaron, drugged and restrained, began to lose consciousness. The last thing he remembered was Denise being near him on the bed, and then nothing. When Aaron woke up, he didn't know how much later, Denise was gone. He was alone, still zip-tied, still blindfolded, and still groggy from the drugs. He struggled against the restraints for hours. He managed to free one hand, then the other. He removed the goggles and the tape. The house was empty. Denise's car, a Toyota Camry, was gone. Aaron looked at the clock. It was nearly 2 p.m. He had been unconscious or restrained for approximately 11 hours. He grabbed his phone and called 911. What Aaron didn't know was while he had been drugged and helpless, Matthew Muller had placed Denise in the trunk of a car and driven her 200 miles north to his mother's cabin in South Lake Tahoe. Denise was blindfolded, bound, and terrified. She had no idea where she was being taken or what was going to happen to her. When they arrived at the cabin, Matthew Muller brought her inside. The next 48 hours would be, in Denise's words, hell. Matthew set up cameras in the bedroom. He filmed everything. He sexually assaulted Denise twice, on March 23rd and again on March 24th. The assaults were recorded on video, evidence that would later be found by police and used to convict him. Between the assaults, Matthew engaged in bizarre psychological torture. He talked to Denise as if she were a participant in some elaborate training exercise. He claimed that he was part of a group preparing for high-stakes robberies. He said this was practice. He showed no empathy, no remorse, and no recognition that Denise was a human being with her own life, her own feelings, and her own right to exist free from terror. Denise would later tell Matthew Muller in court, quote, "You treated me like an object, a toy, an animal," end quote. Throughout the ordeal, Denise did something remarkable. She survived. She tried to stay calm, to humanize herself to her captor, hoping it would make him less likely to kill her. She answered his questions, complied with his demands, and did what she needed to do to stay alive. She prayed that someone, somewhere, was looking for her. When Aaron Quinn called 911 to report that his girlfriend had been kidnapped, Vallejo police responded. Officers came to his home, took his statement, and began a search. But almost immediately, something felt wrong. Aaron's story was bizarre. Kidnappers who used recorded messages and sophisticated equipment, a random demand of only $8,500, oddly specific and relatively small, the 11-hour delay before calling police. Detective Matt Mustard was assigned to the case. Instead of treating Aaron as a victim, Mustard treated him as a suspect. Aaron was taken to the police station and interrogated for 17 hours. Aaron later said, quote, "They were convinced I had murdered Denise. They kept asking me about where I had hidden her body," end quote. Aaron did take a polygraph test that was administered by the FBI at approximately 2 a.m. on March 24th. He passed, but the police still didn't believe him. Meanwhile, something strange was happening. On March 24th at 12:23 p.m., someone sent an email to Henry K. Lee, a reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle. The email claimed to be from Denise's kidnappers. It said that she would be released the following day and provided specific details about the kidnapping that had not been made public. The email read, quote, "We will send a link to her location after she has been dropped off. She will be in good health and safe while she waits," end quote. On the morning of March 25th, 2015, true to the email's promise, Denise Huskins was released. Matthew Muller drove her nearly 500 miles south and dropped her off in Huntington Beach, near her parents' home, near where she had grown up. Denise immediately called her father. She was safe, alive, and she had been through hell, but she had survived. She called the Vallejo Police Department to let them know that she was okay. And that's when everything went wrong. On March 25th, 2015, around 9:27 p.m., Lieutenant Kenny Park of the Vallejo Police Department held a press conference. Standing before the cameras and all the reporters, he made a stunning announcement. Quote, "There is no evidence to support the claims that this was a kidnapping. We have determined that the incident reported was not a kidnapping. Mr. Quinn and Miss Huskins have plundered valuable resources away from our community and have taken the focus away from the true victims of our community while instilling fear. We extend our apologies for the worries and concerns which this event created for the Vallejo community. It is Mr. Quinn and Miss Huskins that owe this community an apology." End quote. The police didn't just say they couldn't find the evidence of a kidnapping, they actively accused Denise and Aaron of fabricating the entire story. They compared it to Gone Girl, the 2014 film in which the female character fakes her own abduction. The press conference was broadcast on every local news channel. Within hours, it was national news. Social media exploded with outrage directed at Denise and Aaron. Gone Girl hoax, fake kidnapping, couple lies about abduction. Strangers sent hate mail, death threats were pouring in, and people that they had never met accused them of being criminals, liars, and sociopaths. Aaron's mother, Marianne Quinn, watched her son being destroyed in the media. She later said, quote, "It was horrific. They were being vilified for something they did not do," end quote. But here's what Vallejo police did not know or chose to ignore. On March 26th, the same anonymous email account sent another message to Henry Lee at the San Francisco Chronicle. This one included a detailed manifesto describing the kidnapping in explicit detail, details that only someone who had been there could know. On March 28th, another email with more details and more evidence. On March 30th, an email was sent directly to Lieutenant Kenny Park, demanding that the Vallejo Police Department publicly apologize to Denise Huskins. On March 31st, yet another email. This one threatening that if the police did not apologize, the kidnappers would strike again to prove that the kidnapping was real. However, the Vallejo police did not investigate these emails seriously. They didn't try to trace them or consider that maybe, just maybe, they had gotten it wrong. Instead, they doubled down. They insisted that it was a hoax. They began investigating Denise and Aaron for filing a false police report. They threatened them with criminal charges. Denise, who had just survived 48 hours of sexual assault and psychological torture, was now being treated like a criminal by the very people who were supposed to help her. Denise later said, quote, "For so many years we had to stand by silently as the whole world had misinformed conversations and judgments about the worst moment of our life and who we are as people." End quote. Aaron Quinn's attorney said Aaron was in, quote, "terrible shape" after the ordeal, quote, "exhausted both mentally and physically." Denise's attorney, Doug Rappaport, insisted that Denise was, quote, "absolutely, unequivocally, 100% positively a victim," end quote. But no one was listening. April and May of 2015 were agony for Denise and Aaron. They battled depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. They received hundreds of negative messages on social media. Strangers harassed them on the street, and former friends and acquaintances distanced themselves. All the while, Matthew Muller, the real kidnapper, the serial rapist, the Harvard-educated monster, was free. On top of that, he was planning his next attack. June 5th, 2015, around 9:30 p.m., just over 2 months after kidnapping Denise Huskins, Matthew Muller broke into another home. This time, it was in Dublin, California, a city about 40 miles from Vallejo. Matthew Muller used the same MO. He broke into a family's home while they were sleeping. He tied up the parents, and he planned to kidnap their teenage daughter. But this time, something backfired. The father fought back. He struggled against his restraints and confronted Matthew Muller physically. Matthew panicked and fled, leaving behind something crucial: his cell phone. June 8th, 2015. Dublin police detective Misty Carausu was investigating the attempted home invasion. The cell phone that Matthew Muller had left behind was a goldmine of evidence. The detective was thorough, meticulous, and the kind of detective who doesn't stop until she has answers. Detective Misty traced the phone to Matthew Muller and obtained a search warrant for his mother's cabin in South Lake Tahoe. When Detective Carausu and Alameda County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the cabin, what they found was shocking. They found blacked-out swim goggles with long blonde hair stuck to them, which matched Denise Huskins. Zip ties, Aaron Quinn's laptop computer, which was stolen during the kidnapping. Duct tape, a stolen white Ford Mustang parked outside, and GPS data showing the Mustang had been driven to Huntington Beach, exactly where Denise had been dropped off. Detective Misty immediately realized what she was looking at. She'd heard about the Vallejo hoax kidnapping, and she knew it was not a hoax. She contacted the FBI. Aaron Quinn later said, quote, "Misty had compassion and curiosity for finding facts. She was relentless. There is a hero in this story, and it is Misty. I think she needs to be commended for that." End quote. On June 29th of 2015, the FBI obtained a search warrant for Matthew Muller's arrest. On July 1st, they searched a storage unit in Muller's name and found drones. Matthew Muller had used these drones to surveil Denise and Aaron's home before the kidnapping. They found a wireless camera system, bed sheets, a stained mattress pad, and the recorded audio files that matched the voices that Aaron and Denise had heard. And most damningly, video recordings of Matthew setting up cameras in a bedroom and then sexually assaulting Denise Huskins while she was blindfolded and bound. The evidence was overwhelming. On July 13th of 2015, the FBI announced that Matthew Muller had been charged with kidnapping Denise Huskins. That same day, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn held a press conference with their attorneys. They did not speak to the media. They were too emotional and too exhausted, but they stood together, holding hands tightly while tears streamed down their faces. Their attorneys demanded an apology from the Vallejo Police Department. Denise's attorney, Doug Rappaport, said, quote, "The Vallejo Police Department owes Miss Huskins and Mr. Quinn a public apology." End quote. Daniel Russo, Aaron's attorney, was more blunt. Quote, "They were victimized twice, once by Muller and once by the Vallejo Police Department." However, the apology did not come. Not then, not for years. So, who was the man that kidnapped Denise Huskins and destroyed her and Aaron's lives? Well, Matthew Daniel Muller was born on March 27, 1977, with some sources saying April 27th. He grew up in California in what appeared to be a normal, supportive suburban family. He was intelligent, driven, and academically gifted. From 1995 to 1999, Matthew Muller served in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was deployed to the Middle East and was honorably discharged in 1999, though he later claimed he suffered from Gulf War illness and problems with psychosis. From 2003 to 2006, Matthew Muller attended Harvard University and earned his law degree from Harvard Law School in 2006. This is where he began to exhibit signs of mental illness. During his time at Harvard, he was diagnosed with major depression with signs of mania after contemplating suicide. In 2008, Matthew Muller was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. His symptoms continued to worsen. He developed paranoid delusions that the government had wiretapped his phone and hacked his computer because some of his immigration clients had suspected ties to terrorists. Post-Harvard, Matthew Muller became an immigration attorney in San Francisco, working at the Carausu, Purvis, and Bogue law firm. Colleagues described him as intelligent and competent, but there were signs that something was wrong. In 2012, he was terminated from the firm for, quote, confidential but non-criminal reasons. In 2013, Matthew Muller's law license was suspended for failing to pay annual dues. Later that year, the California State Bar filed disciplinary charges against him for failing to file a green card application for a client's son after taking $1,250 in advance money. In 2015, Matthew Muller was officially disbarred after failing to cooperate with the bar's investigation. What the public didn't know was that Matthew Muller had been committing violent crimes for many years. On September 29, 2009, Matthew Muller, dressed in a black spandex suit and ski mask, broke into a 27-year-old woman's home in Mountain View, California. He tied her up, covered her eyes with blacked-out swim goggles, forced her to drink NyQuil, and told her that he was stealing her identity to steal her money. The victim later attended a public policy panel at Harvard in 2008 and remembered seeing Matthew Muller there. Also in 2009, Matthew committed another home invasion sexual assault in Palo Alto. This crime was not connected to him until 2024, when he confessed and DNA confirmed his involvement. On November 29th of 2012, a similar home invasion occurred near the Stanford campus. The 26-year-old female victim fought back. The perpetrator left behind laptop computers and bump keys with DNA on them. At the time, DNA testing didn't match Matthew Muller, but investigators now believe that he may have been involved. Matthew Muller has since confessed to committing his first kidnapping and rape at age 16 in California. Charges have not been filed in that case as of 2025. Matthew Muller had developed a delusional belief system. He claimed that he was part of a sophisticated criminal organization that kidnapped, quote, evil, wealthy people for ransom to redistribute wealth to the poor. A twisted Robin Hood fantasy. He believed that he was training himself and others for elaborate heists. But the reality was much simpler and more horrifying. Matthew Muller was a serial rapist and kidnapper whose mental illness had spiraled into violent criminality. And he was getting away with it because police either didn't connect the crimes or didn't take the victims seriously. On September 29, 2016, Matthew Muller pleaded guilty in federal court to one count of kidnapping. In exchange, the government agreed to seek 40 years in prison instead of life. Matthew stood before Judge Troy Nunley and admitted to using computer-generated voices, blackened swim goggles, liquid sleeping medication, drones for surveillance, and numerous props in Denise Huskins' abduction. On March 16, 2017, Denise Huskins stood in federal court in Sacramento and faced her kidnapper. She told Matthew Muller, her voice shaking, quote, "You treated me like an object, a toy, an animal. My life was coming to an end, and I made peace with that. Once released, I couldn't fathom the pain that was to come. I felt like a little girl, scared, wanting to hear the voices of my parents saying it's okay." End quote. Describing how she survived the sexual assaults, Denise said, quote, "The only way I got through it was to picture that it was Aaron that I was with." End quote. Matthew Muller, shackled and wearing an orange jail jumpsuit, looked straight ahead and showed no emotion. When it was his turn to speak, he said, quote, "I am sick with shame for the pain and horror I caused." End quote. Judge Troy Nunley called the abduction, quote, "a heinous, atrocious, horrible crime," and sentenced Muller to 40 years in federal prison. Aaron's mother, Marianne Quinn, said afterward, quote, "He doesn't have empathy. I don't think he's capable of it." End quote. On March 18, 2022, Matthew Muller was sentenced to an additional 31 years in state prison after pleading no contest to 2 counts of forcible rape of Denise Huskins, plus robbery, burglary, and false imprisonment. The state charges were filed because Muller could not be charged federally with rape. There is no appropriate federal sex crime statute that applied. The sentences run consecutively. Matthew Muller will spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2024, Matthew Muller began confessing to additional crimes. Working with Denise Huskins, Aaron Quinn, Detective Misty Carausu, Dublin Police Chief Garrett Holmes, and Yolo County District Attorney Jeff Pearson, investigators pieced together a timeline of crimes dating back to 1993. Matthew Muller confessed to the following: the 2009 Mountain View sexual assault, the 2009 Palo Alto sexual assault, a previously unreported April 2015 kidnapping in San Ramon, just 2 weeks after releasing Denise while police were still calling her a liar, and multiple other crimes during his college years in Boston. DNA testing confirmed his confessions. In December of 2024, the Santa Clara County District Attorney announced new charges. In January of 2025, Contra Costa County announced charges for the April 2015 San Ramon kidnapping. District Attorney Jeff Rosen said, quote, "The details of this person's violent crime spree seem scripted for Hollywood, but they are tragically real." End quote. Matthew Muller now faces multiple life sentences. He will never be free again. For years, the Vallejo Police Department refused to apologize. In March of 2016, Denise and Aaron filed a defamation lawsuit against the city of Vallejo and its police department, seeking damages for the destruction of their reputations, the emotional distress, and the violation of their constitutional rights. On March 16, 2018, the city of Vallejo settled the lawsuit for $2.5 million, but still no official apology. 6 years later, on August 25th, 2021, Vallejo Police Chief Shawnee Williams finally issued a public apology, stating, quote, "Victims of crime deserve respect, empathy, and support, not skepticism or disparagement." He also acknowledged that the department's handling of the case had inflicted significant emotional distress and reflected broader systemic issues within the police force. 6 years. It took 6 years for the police department to just say, "We were wrong. We're sorry." For Denise and Aaron, the apology was bittersweet. It validated what they had known all along, but it couldn't undo the damage. It couldn't give them back those years of being called liars, of being investigated as criminals, of being re-victimized by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn are married now. They have 2 beautiful daughters. They live a quiet life, far from the media spotlight that once destroyed them. But they have not been silent. In 2021, they published a book called Victim F: From Crime Victims to Suspects to Survivors. The title refers to how Denise was labeled in court documents, not by name, but as Victim F, dehumanized and reduced to a letter. In the book and in numerous interviews, Denise and Aaron have shared their full story: the kidnapping, the police misconduct, the public shaming, and their journey to healing. On January 17th, 2024, Netflix released a 3-part documentary series called American Nightmare. It became Netflix's highest-rated documentary of 2024, introducing millions of people to Denise and Aaron's story. The documentary did spark national conversations about police misconduct and victim blaming, the dangers of assuming victims are lying, how law enforcement should handle sexual assault cases, and the need for better training and accountability. Denise and Aaron have become advocates. They speak at law enforcement training events, teaching officers how to properly handle sexual assault investigations and how to avoid re-victimizing survivors. In March of 2024, they appeared at a training event in Seaside, California, describing what Vallejo police did wrong and how officers can do better. Denise said, quote, "We have 2 beautiful daughters. Our little ones give us so much joy. We refuse to live our lives in fear and hiding. We want to make a change for our daughters and for all survivors." End quote. They've also worked tirelessly to help solve Matthew Muller's cold cases. By corresponding with investigators, reviewing evidence, and even communicating with Mueller's former attorney, they've helped bring justice to other victims who might never have been identified. In 2025, California's top prosecutors honored Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn as, quote, "Witnesses of the Year" for their role in helping solve Matthew Muller's decades-long crime spree. The Denise Huskins case exposes deep problems in how law enforcement handles sexual assault and kidnapping cases. Victim blaming. When a story seems too bizarre or doesn't fit investigators' expectations, they're so quick to accuse victims of lying. Having tunnel vision. Once Vallejo police decided that it was a hoax, they ignored evidence to the contrary. They didn't investigate the emails. They didn't follow leads. They were more interested in being right than in finding the truth. Then there is gender bias. Research shows that female victims, especially attractive young women, are more likely to be disbelieved if their cases don't fit certain narratives. Also, lack of accountability. It took 6 years for the Vallejo PD to apologize. No officers were disciplined and no systemic reforms were implemented initially. Then there was the Gone Girl effect. After the 2014 film popularized the idea of women faking kidnappings, law enforcement became overly suspicious of real victims. Denise and Aaron's advocacy is focused on changing these systemic issues. They want to make sure that no other victim has to endure what they did. Denise Huskins said, quote, "For so many years, we had to stand by silently as the whole world had misinformed conversations and judgments about the worst moment of our life and who we are as people." End quote. These words capture the essence of this story. Two people who survived a horrific crime only to be victimized again by the system that was supposed to help them. But this story is also about resilience. Denise and Aaron never gave up. They didn't retreat into silence, and they didn't let the shame and stigma destroy them. They fought back. They demanded the truth be heard. They advocated for themselves and for others. They built a life together, a marriage, a family, and a future. They turned their nightmare into purpose. And they helped catch a serial rapist who might have continued victimizing people for years if not for their persistence and the dedication of Detective Misty Carausu. Let's talk about the lessons to be learned from their story. Believe victims. Not every story will make sense immediately. Not every victim will act the way you expect. But the default position should be belief and support, not skepticism and accusation. Investigate thoroughly. Vallejo police made up their minds within hours and then spent weeks trying to prove their theory rather than following the evidence. Hold law enforcement accountable. Police misconduct destroys lives. There must be consequences. Support survivors. Denise and Aaron had each other, supportive families, and good attorneys. Not every victim has those resources. We need better systems to help survivors navigate the aftermath of trauma. Mental illness is not an excuse. Matthew Muller was bipolar. He had PTSD. He was struggling with severe mental health issues. But millions of people with mental illness never harm anyone. Matthew Muller made choices. He is responsible for those choices. As of 2025, Matthew Muller is 47 years old. He's incarcerated and will remain so for the rest of his life. He faces multiple life sentences as additional charges are filed for cold case crimes. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn are in their late 30s, raising their 2 daughters and continuing their advocacy work. They have turned unimaginable trauma into meaningful change. Detective Misty Carausu deserves special recognition. While Vallejo police were busy accusing victims, she was doing actual detective work. She followed the evidence, she made the connections, and didn't stop until she had answers. As I said earlier, Aaron Quinn said that the hero of this story is Misty, and he thinks that she needs to be commended for that. In law enforcement circles, the Huskins-Quinn case is now studied as a cautionary tale, an example of how not to handle a sexual assault investigation. It's taught at police academies and discussed in training seminars. It has changed protocols in departments across the country. That's Denise and Aaron's legacy, not as victims or as liars, but as survivors who fought back and made sure that this never happens to anyone else. On the night of March 22nd, 2015, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn went to sleep believing they were going to try again, to rebuild trust, to make their relationship work, and to have a future together. They had no idea that within hours, a Harvard-educated serial rapist would break into their home and tear their lives apart. They had no idea that the police, the people who were supposed to help them, would become their worst enemies. They had no idea that they would spend years fighting to clear their names, to restore their reputations, and to simply be believed. But they also had no idea how strong they would become, how they would not only survive, but thrive, how they would build a beautiful life together, despite or perhaps because of what they endured. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn are not the Gone Girl couple. They are survivors, advocates, and heroes. And their story, as painful as it is, reminds us all of the importance of truth, justice, and never giving up no matter how dark the night becomes. There are so many questions that we can ask. Why did Vallejo police jump to the conclusion that it was a hoax? What biases or assumptions influenced their investigation? How did the Gone Girl film impact public perception? Did the popularity of that movie make it easier for people to believe that Denise and Aaron were lying? What role did victim blaming play in this case? How do societal attitudes about quote unquote perfect victims affect criminal investigations? Should there have been consequences for the Vallejo police officers involved? Why do you think no disciplinary action was taken? How did Denise and Aaron's relationship survive this trauma? What does their story tell us about resilience and partnership? What if Detective Misty Carausu had not been thorough? Would Matthew Muller have been caught? How many more victims might there have been? What systemic changes are needed? How can law enforcement better handle cases that involve sexual assault and kidnapping? We also have the role of mental illness, knowing Matthew Muller had documented bipolar disorder and PTSD. How should the justice system balance mental illness with criminal accountability? We have also heard about the power of advocacy. How has Denise and Aaron's advocacy work changed law enforcement practices? There's also media responsibility. How should journalists cover cases like this to avoid contributing to victim blaming? The Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn case is ultimately a story about the importance of believing survivors. When police decided within hours that the kidnapping was a hoax, they allowed a serial rapist to remain free for 3 more months. They enabled him to kidnap another victim in April of 2015, and they traumatized 2 innocent people who were already suffering. They wasted massive resources on a false theory. They damaged public trust in law enforcement and created a national spectacle that humiliated the victims. If they had simply investigated the evidence, followed the emails, traced the phone calls, searched for similar crimes, they might have caught Matthew Muller immediately. They might have prevented additional victims, and they might have spared Denise and Aaron years of agony. But they didn't, because they didn't believe it. The lesson is super clear here. Start with belief, investigate thoroughly, follow the evidence wherever it leads, and never, ever publicly accuse victims of lying before you have proof. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn deserved better. Every survivor deserves better. Their story has changed how law enforcement handles these cases, and that's their legacy. And that's a legacy worth celebrating. As Denise Huskins said, quote, "We refuse to live our lives in fear and hiding. We want to make a change for our daughters and for all survivors." End quote. If I could say anything to Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn, it would be thank you for your courage in sharing your story. Thank you for turning trauma into advocacy. Thank you for helping other survivors find their voices. If I could say something to Detective Misty and the Dublin Police Department, I would say thank you for doing what Vallejo police should have done from the beginning: investigating, following the evidence, and believing victims. To everyone out there who has survived sexual assault and or police misconduct, you're not alone. Your story does matter, and you deserve to be believed. Denise and Aaron have been extraordinarily generous in sharing their story publicly. They didn't have to speak out. They could have retreated into privacy after their ordeal, but they chose advocacy instead. They chose to help others, and that choice has made a real difference. If you or someone you know has experienced similar trauma, either from crime or from being disbelieved by authorities, please know that help is available and that you are not alone. There are resources in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and until next time, I love you guys. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them." Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.